Joining us today on Talks with T is none other than Mustafa Koita. He's the CEO and founder of Coita Milk, my favorite oat milk of choice.
Thanks for the plug.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. My pleasure.
So I want to start in the beginning. Tell me about your childhood.
Yeah, so, a lot of people don't know this, but I had a pretty tough childhood, when I was growing up. I grew up in sort of an upper middle class family in Chicago. Was sort of on that path, first generation Indian to like get good grades and go to a school and become like a doctor or an engineer like my peers.
Or like the CEO, future CEO of Google or Microsoft.
That wasn't my path at the time. But, I got sort of knocked off that path at an early age. And at the age of 13, my mom passed away. And it was a pretty traumatic experience for me. I mean, not only did she pass away, but I was in the house, in the room while she was going through a brain aneurysm and sort of heard her final words, and, she died in front of me. And as a 13-year-old, that had a really big impact on me, and just, it was like a tornado, and instantly I was going from straight A's at school to D's and F's and getting into some bad...
I'm sorry to hear that, man.
Yeah,
I can't imagine what that's like.
No, it was pretty tough back then. I mean, it's a lot easier to talk about it now, now that I'm much older and wiser. But that really knocked me off my course, of that typical first-gen Indian kid, who's going to be a doctor and whatnot. And, it's interesting because we were talking earlier, but I think one of the reasons that I've been successful is that I had a really tough childhood, and I had to build thick skin and independence and learn how to deal with, messed up situations in my personal life. And those same skills that I was dealing with, my emotions and everything when I was a kid, ended up helping me become a successful leader in my professional life later on. And, I think that was a big deal. That was a big deal for me at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess, I want to rewind back a bit. I guess what was the inflection point? You mentioned that you were started going on this downward trajectory.
Yeah, that's a good...
When did it all change? When did it all change for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I was going through this downward trajectory. My grades sucked. Like I said, hanging out with the wrong crowd, picking up bad habits. At an early age.
This is in Chicago.
This is in Chicago. I was at Naperville North High School.
Okay.
And as an Indian...
Do you remember the name of your English teacher?
No, I don't, but I don't remember the name of my English teacher.
It would have been nice to give her a shout out.
I know.
Anyways.
So I'm going to look it up now, So it's a really good question, Tarek, because what was happening is I was in this downward trajectory, and my friends who had a normal, they didn't have all this chaos going on in their life, they were on their upward trajectory, right? And they were getting good grades. And I remember in high school, they were applying to like MIT, Cornell, all these amazing schools, Harvard and stuff like that. And my dad, who was a single parent at the time, was like worried, is this kid going to even get into college? Because I had barely had a 2.0, which was just below a C, And luckily, there was a state school in Chicago that had, they were not very well known, but decent. It was called Northern Illinois University. I'm really proud of that school, by the way, now. They had a probationary program. So if kids like me had bad grades, they would let you in for a semester. And only if you got A's and B's would you stay in. Yeah. So, to your question about the inflection point, I barely got in, right? And the first semester, I worked my ass off, because I was so scared that my Indian father, who had his friends' kids going to great schools, would be like ashamed of me, because like, hey, here's this kid, he barely got into an okay school and then flunked out. And so it's not the greatest reason, but it was a reason that, sort of put the first log on my fire was peer pressure. I didn't want to, in front of my friends' eyes, be a failure, especially a basic thing, which is college. Did you make it into college if already not going to like an Ivy League school? And that started a whole, in college, so many different things happen from that. And that's where I think a lot of my entrepreneurial skills actually happened in college.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you founded a fraternity, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Or led a fraternity in
Yeah,
college.
yeah. So I think that was a symptom of this snowball effect that started. So what had happened is I got into NIU. I was the first 6 months. I was like, just trying to get my A's and B's, and
Yeah.
luckily I did. I've always been very smart, but I never was applying myself because I was so caught up with that, personal baggage. And
Yeah.
so after I got through my probationary period, first 6 months, I was like, oh, finally, a breather. And then the second part of my life, the second part of that freshman year is I wanted to make friends. I was kind of an outlier, didn't have a lot of friends in high school, like close friends, and whatnot. And socially, I wanted friends, And so what I did is I went to all the fraternities the second semester. And it's called rushing. So you meet all the fraternities at NIU, and they're the biggest houses, most popular houses, the jocks, and then these guys. And I went to like 12, 13 houses hoping that I could be like part of a community. And I got rejected at every single one of them. They all didn't give me what's called a bid. And I think that was sort of the second part of the second log that went on my fire is I said, you know what? If these guys aren't going to let me be part of their fraternity, then you know what? I'm going to start my own house,
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, how do I do that? And then I had a bunch of military guys on my floor in my dorms, and I had a bunch of rugby players on my floor.
Yeah.
And they were super cool, and the fraternity system had hazing. It was a little cliquish, and I was like, hey guys, why don't we start our own house? I was very friendly, and
Yeah.
and I got six, seven guys together, and we started our own house. We made our own rules, right? And I was like, wow, this is so cool. I got rejected, but I can create. It was the first time I had the taste of creating my own destiny, right? And then we created that house, and now it's a pretty successful house, on campus.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So that was your first foray into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it really was. It really was my first foray.
Yeah. And I guess, looking back at it now, how important was an experience like that early on in your life, kind of building something ground up, and how much of that really kind of carried over?
Everything, man. Everything. Because, I didn't learn a lot in classes. I mean, I don't think I applied any of what I learned in classes. What I learned is the life experiences is what I've applied really in business and entrepreneurship, like grit, persistence. And so for example, when we started the house, it was just 6 of us and no one really knew us, right? Nobody knew about us. It was just kind of like when I started the Coita brand, nobody knew us. So I learned how to be okay in a situation where nobody knew anything about us, right? And that's really the essence of entrepreneurship, is not being afraid to start from ground zero, right? People are used to like, I joined a big company, or, this thing is already funded, or, I was like, there's nothing here. So that was one learning that I got out of it. And then I built confidence. I was very insecure when I was a kid. I was very shy. I couldn't speak in front of people really well. And I think the fact that I started this from 6 guys and it went to 40 members in the course of 3-4 years, and then there's a second part. I then got into student government and ran for a political office in school. And between those 2 experiences, I built confidence that I can get up in front of people, I can share my ideas, and I can do things. I can create my own destiny. And that all happened in the fraternity and the student government experiences that I had in college.
That's amazing. I guess, how, thinking back on it, you talk about lacking confidence growing up as a kid, and all of a sudden these experiences helping you gain confidence. Those aren't kind of switches that happen overnight, right? And from my experience, a lot of entrepreneurs go through these phases of even when they're on the highest highs, go through these phases of self-doubt, self-talk that isn't super reinforcing. So I guess looking back, or even today, you know, how do you balance that confidence with sometimes that self-doubt that creeps up every now and then?
Yeah. You know, that's a very, very good question, you know, and it's the essence, I think. And what it gets to is self-confidence, you know. And what I've realized is that I think there is a viewpoint that, hey, people are just born confident, or they get it, or they inherit it, you know, like it's a gene or something. And, you know, I was watching a TED Talk, in fact, yesterday, and someone said something and it really stuck with me. And I think self-confidence is a skill. And what's great about that statement is it means that anyone can create self-confidence, right? And that's what you really need to be a successful entrepreneur. And what I realized is, I think it's based on one pretense, which is that if you think positive and you believe you can, you have a much higher probability of getting to that end result versus you thinking negative and believing, hey, I can't do it. So look, I'm a perfect example, right? I lacked self-confidence when I was younger. I still, and it's okay, right? You know, it's normal. You shouldn't feel like because I'm insecure that's a bad thing. I had to learn how to accept it and say, look, I'm just feeling insecure about this, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But what I've done is I've started training my mind to say, yeah, I can do it, you know. And the best way of convincing myself that I can do it is to look at my past, right? And every single one of us, Tarek, you've had a journey. A lot of our entrepreneurial colleagues in the UAE, in Dubai, have gone through that. There's so many wins that we have that we overlook. Like, look, getting past my mother's death, getting into college, getting through probation, starting a fraternity. You know, these are all little wins. Getting up and working out, you know, joining yoga, for example, and then sticking with it. They're all wins, right? And so I've started to learn that I need to pat myself on the back and recognize my wins, and that gives me confidence because I was like, look, I've won all these things, you know.
Little Indian boy growing up in Chicago, starts a frat, goes into student government, and then I believe ends up in tech when kind of tech was still in its infancy.
Yeah. So I got out of college, and through the starting of the fraternity, one of our alumni advisors who helped us start the house, you know, he was like a sponsor.
Yeah.
He had worked at a company called US Robotics, and this was during the first .com boom, and they were a really up and coming kind of medium-sized company that was becoming larger. And basically, I got into, you know, again, because I didn't have an Ivy League degree, realized I still had peer pressure coming out of school because my friends who went to Harvard were working at BCG, McKinsey. They were going into med school,
living the consulting life.
Yeah, making six figures from
Big
day
bucks,
one.
Yeah,
you know, and I'm getting job offers for like 30,000, you know, or a lot, and I had to move into my parents' house right after school. All my Indian friends, you know, first gen Indians are getting the kick-ass job and getting married, and the daughters parents are looking at the boy and how much money he's making and is he from a broken family or not. So all this is going through my head, and I had my second phase of sort of peer pressure. So what it ended up making me do, and I can only sort of realize this now, is I started taking risks because I always felt this need to catch up to my peers, you know, who were making that money, and I wanted to get the girl, you know, so I was trying to take risks to like catch up. So I ended up finding myself going into tech, which is a riskier industry maybe than some of the other ones. I was going for sales roles, right? Because sales roles had low base, they were risky, but if you were a great salesperson, you could make a lot of money and catch up, right? And then I was also joining startups, so risky companies, and I was employee number 4 or 5 at 2 startups, right? And that was the...
And this is like in the 90s?
No, this is late 90s, early 2000, you know, around the dot-com bubble, you know.
So you're an internet tech startup OG.
Yeah, and I moved to New York City too because I didn't feel comfortable in Chicago. Chicago was
Yeah.
was a bit more conservative in its culture and thinking. And when I went to New York to visit my friends, I was like, wow, this is so open thinking, and I like the energy. And so I was in New York for 4 years, and that culture really rubbed off on my communication style. And I
Yeah.
just liked the energy. So I was in 2 startups in New York City. And so to your question, that's what because of what happened in my past, that was getting me into the more riskier, cavalier sort of like positions. And I'm so glad I did that because that I learned so much in those environments. One of my startups that I joined as employee number 4 failed miserably. And I would say to this day, watching that founder and how he raised his money and how he ran the company and everything, and was the best learning experience ever.
In what sense?
Well, there was a lot of mistakes that were made. He's a great guy, smart and all this, but he spent his money in probably the wrong ways. He set up his team in probably the wrong ways. And I mean, in the middle of the company, he came to me and said, "Hey, Mustafa, could we cut your salary in half?" And I was like, "Why?" He's like, "So the company can live another 6 months." And I was like, "Oh my God, how did we get into this situation?"
Yeah.
So, and that was just before I got engaged, right? So I was freaking out as well too. So I learned a lot through those experiences because I was taking risks and getting into and I was a tech guy basically.
Yeah, yeah. So you were in this kind of stage where you felt you had to take the riskier opportunities because high risk, high reward. So if you wanted to catch up, that was your path.
Exactly, and I'll tell you, the risk taking paid off, right? Because number one, there were 2 big takeaways I got from my early stage experience. Yeah. One is, I got the employee number 4, employee number 5 startup experience, right? I learned that, you'd have to, I was writing artificial intelligence patents for a logistics startup, right? I was making my own chair that got delivered by like IKEA, and I was pitching the CEO of one of the partner companies, and I was going and delivering samples of things on my scooter, and that's startup life. You're doing C-level stuff, and you're washing your own toilet at the same time, right? And so I got some of that experience. The second experience is, with the exception of the startups where I was in a software product management, product development role, the other companies were all sales. I started inside. I was a salesman, and I learned how to sell. And I learned a couple things about sales. Is that sales is the single most important skill you need as an entrepreneur. You're always selling something. The other thing that I learned about sales is not sugarcoating. People have this, people who are afraid of sales and people who are afraid of sales, people have this wrong impression. But sales is not bullshitting your way.
The typical used car salesman.
Yeah, it's actually the exact opposite. When you're talking about bigger, more important things. And I think that what I learned is that sales is all about reading a person and understanding if you provide value or not. And if you don't, walk away. And so that gets to the third thing about sales is just don't bullshit anyone.
So you go from this big shot tech kid who was CEO and coffee boy at the same time. And then you get into the corporate world.
Yeah. So I had a very interesting professional career after my tech, startup scene. So I got headhunted and interviewed just before, about 9 months before 9/11, when I was living in New York City, and I got recruited as an inside salesperson at a facial recognition company that was funded by DARPA, or the U.S. Military Research and Development Arm, for a video that could recognize faces automatically. And I got into that company, very high tech, very cool stuff. Working with the military was really, the research arm was so interesting. Met some of the most amazing scientists ever. worked with a guy named Joseph Attic, who invented that facial recognition algorithm. Learned a lot from him, and then 9/11 happened, you know, and I was in New York City, and I saw the first tower, you know, actually collapse. I used to live 30 blocks from there.
Live, like in person,
yeah,
you saw.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw the first tower collapse. I saw the first tower hit, and then I saw the second tower collapse. And that was a life-changing moment. And you know, I was living just in Union Square at the time with 2 other roommates.
Yeah.
And what happened on my professional career is the company that I was with, all of a sudden, you know, facial recognition was a solution at airports, and that company just took off, and I took off with that company, and you know, again, kind of an interesting past. But then what happened is after our company took off, there was a guy named Bob LaPenta who was an M&A guy in the defense business, used to work at Lockheed Martin, and he had made a bunch of money and took the fingerprinting company, the facial recognition company, the eye scanning company, and merged them all into one. And I was part of that merger. And then he put us in a room, all the salespeople from all 3 companies, and he's formed a board of directors on that company. That was interesting. So it was George Tenet, the former head of the CIA, Louis Freeh, the former head of the FBI, Admiral James Loy, who used to run the National Guard. So very senior government people. And then he had the people who were selling to the Middle East and India and all that from all 3 companies pitch. And I gave my presentation, the other 2 guys, salespeople, and then he loved mine the best. And then he put me in charge of the whole Middle East and Asia. And I was working, I got to work along, I got to connect and talk to like George and Louis Freeh and all these guys. And when I was running,
you're on a first name basis with George Tenet.
At the time, I haven't been in touch with him for a while.
Do you slide into his DMs?
No, not at all. I mean, spoke to him just a few times, but he introduced us to some of the movers and shakers in the Middle East when I was selling. Yeah. You know, I was helping the governments here set up their national security systems. So all the border control systems, the e-gate systems, the fingerprinting systems in Saudi Arabia, I worked on those with the ministries back then. And, you know,
that's as I'm listening here to you kind of talk, you know, something really stuck out. You know, you're talking about how much time you spent honing your sales skills, right? And this freak event happens, 9/11, and you happen to be in the right place at the right time, right? With the right company. I mean, terrible time, but right time for the company. And what you've done is you spent all these years honing your sales skills and leaning into developing those. And so what ends up happening when the opportunity arises and you're put on the spot to pitch, you end up being the best pitcher, the best salesperson. And so it's crazy how life happens sometimes. That you spend all this time kind of building the skill set, and then when it mattered most, at least at that point, you were able to lean into that, and that really kind of put you in the forefront.
Yeah, no, Tarek, I think you hit the nail on the head. What you say reminds me of that book, Atomic Habits, you know, by James Clear, where he talks about all these 1% events or learnings that you have during your life. And there's no such thing as luck, right? I mean, everyone's handed opportunities. Yeah, you get an opportunity here and there, but you're either ready at that point to capture it or you're not ready. And I feel like during my life, all those things that you highlighted so accurately, you know, when I had that chance, you know, I was ready, right? I was more ready than the other guy who maybe hadn't, you know, taken advantage of all those learning opportunities. And so here I am, you know, pitching.
Sorry, Coita, I just want to tell you one thing. I mean, you kind of made me reflect on one of my favorite quotes when you said there's no such thing as luck. I love this quote. I can't remember who said it, but it goes something like, "I'm a great believer in luck. the harder I work, the more luck I have.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one.
And I love that. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, a lot of people are like, "Oh, you got this. Hey, you're so lucky you got this," and I'm like, it isn't. It isn't luck. It's actually a culmination of a lot of 1%, sweating it out when you were younger.
Yeah. So you end up in the Middle East. On the national security agenda.
Exactly.
I'm sure there's a lot of things you could tell me, but then you'd have to kill me. So
yeah, no, I mean that was a very different environment. It did that whole system brought they shifted me to London, where I was running the Middle East and Europe out of there, and then the Middle East got so important in terms of revenue on my P&L, and then I told them, let me move to Dubai, because why am I flying back and forth so much and this and that? So I shifted to Dubai about 15 years ago. I was the most successful, I think, international salesperson in the history of the company. And I was very proud of that because when you're selling to government agencies here and and what they're doing, it's all about building trust and credibility and following through on what you say, because they know everything about you, and that, I think that's really where I learned that you just got to keep it real, and I was successful because I wasn't a salesperson. I was just being an honest, good person and being authentic, and that's very important in this part of the world, because it's not about the contract, it's about your relationship and your reputation. Then towards the end of my career at that company, I'd been there almost 9 years. They got sold to someone else, and all the people and leadership that I knew were moving on. So I ended up jumping, and I got a job at Boeing on the defense side. And they liked me because I had all these great contacts and relationships, and I was selling. I was working for their cyber warfare division. So we were selling, all these security systems to similar customer base. And that was good. The only thing about it is that, I started feeling a little complacent at that point in my life. I was just hitting my midlife crisis. It was a lot of wine and cheese parties, flying first in business class all over the world, dealing with government leaders. And, but I just felt like I wasn't excited. I wasn't being challenged, as much anymore. Yeah. It was a very cush job, making tons of money. And that's when there was a couple things that happened at that part of the career there was 2-3 things that happened, and that triggered me into starting Coita.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna let you kind of jump to that point so easily. I mean, listen, I know that life, right? Similar to you, I was at GE and got to a point where I just felt complacent, and I just felt like the money wasn't worth subsidizing my drive. And so I get that, but that's a huge move, man. I mean, from first class, being on the national defense agenda, to an organic milk company.
A startup.
Yeah. So where did the idea for Coita Milk come from? I mean, it's not a natural transition. I can't imagine you were sitting in some airport lounge and said, this organic milk sucks. So tell us about it.
So one, I never had the vision. Everyone's like, hey, you got to have this vision, and what's your 4-year plan, 5-year plan? And I didn't have any of that shit, man. It was really a process, right? A step-by-step process. So the first thing that happened is, I wanted to get out of my job. I felt like I was just a cog, in the big wheel of things. And so I actually, at the end of the day, when I really did peel back the onion, I just wanted freedom, right? I wanted to be able to control my destiny. I wanted the ability to go after and learn things that I wanted to learn, And so I wanted to get off of the tap of my cush salary, the drugs that were coming into my veins. And so I took my life savings. And what I actually did is I just started a company, and I got into food trading. right? I just wanted to try. I knew I liked food because it wasn't cyclical, like defense or luxury or, you know, some things. It was kind of like slow money, but also during a downturn, it was like, you know, either the same or sometimes more or a little bit less. And I liked healthy living. You know, I work out, I do my yoga, I'm big into healthy eating. So I was like, I want to be in food, but let me start with food trading. So actually, my first step was I just left my job. It was a little bit of, let's call it luck, but I was getting complacent, and the new boss that came in was either going to fire me or I was going to quit. So at some point he's like, Mustafa, your head's out of it. You know, you got to start thinking about leaving. And that triggered me to say, God, I got to get out of here because I'm going to get fired soon or I'm going to quit. And so I took my life savings and I started a food trading company. And I started trading. I got a contract.
And at this point, you have kids, you have family.
Oh yeah, I was scared, man, because I knew I had to leave. I was having you know, the mother of my children was having her third child for us at the time. She was like a couple months pregnant, and I was scared. I was really scared because I had two. You know, when you jump into the world of entrepreneurship, it's okay to have conflicting feelings, right? And I was scared as hell, and I was excited, right? But I was more scared than excited, and I was like, shit, I got to figure out a way to get out. I got to make some money. Third kid's on the way. I'm jumping into an industry that I've really not a lot of experience in. And I was scared. And so what I did is I just set up very small goals for me. I'm like, okay, let me incorporate the company. Okay, let me come up with the name. Let me try and get $100,000 in sales, selling anything. And I started getting into food trading, you know. And then when I figured out food trading, then I was like, okay, if I can do a couple trades, can I get into distribution and get the agency, you know, of a company? And so I started, so the transition, my real transition into entrepreneurship was a scary but exciting one, you know, and I set up small goals for me, and that's how I was able to transition into it.
Yeah. Scary but exciting sounds like every day in the life of an entrepreneur. Yeah. So, I mean, what you're saying is slightly controversial. You know, there's a lot of emphasis on, like you said, what's your annual plan? Where's the company going? Especially when you're talking to investors. But what you're saying is it's all about the small goals you set for yourself along the way, and that's really how you got started.
Yeah. I think it depends on the stage of your company. You know, we're an 8 or 9 year old company now, so I can build a 3-year plan because I have some data stability. I've got a track record. You know, I've got a lot of learnings. But listen, when you're early stage, I don't agree with this academic approach and it's driven by investors, you know, those VCs, and they're like, hey, what's your 3-year plan? But look, come on. You know, I mean, I think, you know, there's a couple of my friends that are in the investment community, and one of the smartest ones, you know, Amjad Ahmed, who's a guy who I think really knows his shit. He's always said, you know, you can't do 10 years, right? But a 3-year plan is probably more realistic. You know, the numbers after that are kind of like, okay, I think I'm going to grow 25%. You just multiply it on top of that.
Yeah.
So I guess what I want to say is that there's an academic approach, and look, I'm not saying it's, you know, there are exceptions to the rule, but I don't think you can look at it, and I'm looking at it from a bottom-up approach, and it's very hard to forecast. In the early days, it's hard to forecast 6 months out, you know. So I started planning and forecasting, you know, a quarter out, you know, and then as I grew and became more successful, I would go a year out, and, you know, or 6 months out, and luckily I haven't raised any equity to date. So I've never had to go, I started small because I also didn't want to have to go raise equity, right? I wanted to keep it whole. You know, that may change in the future, but so I didn't have to deal with the academic approach. I dealt with the bottoms up approach and didn't need that 3-year vision plan. You know, I was like, let me get phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, listen, I think you're absolutely right in that looking at the the next proximate objective, right? Looking at that next step um, gives entrepreneurs the flexibility to also change direction. I think sometimes some of the pitfalls of having this plan I've seen entrepreneurs get into is this is the plan, I need to stick to it, and I think even when things aren't working.
No, actually, Tarek, I think, and by the way, you as an entrepreneur, you know it inside out, but if you're not ready to adapt and pivot on a dime, then you're dead, right? Because if you're sticking with your business plan in the face of cash flow negative or losses or challenges, and you can't adapt and pivot, you're dead. You're dead. You have adaptability. I think is the number one skill in today's day and age to be successful. You've got to be able to take your entire vision and throw it in the garbage and be like, hey, this is where we need to go. And that's one of the essences of true entrepreneurship.
You said you made a decision not to raise any money. Tell me more.
So we grew pretty fast, and there was a lot of working capital, issues, and it was difficult, because, the reason I didn't want to raise money is I wanted my freedom. At the end of the day, it wasn't just financial freedom. It was like freedom to continue to have the biggest asset, which is agility, not have to report to someone else or update someone else. I could move fast. And there were times where I was very tempted to say, hey, we need to take out some debt or we need to raise some equity. In fact, the Harvard Business School case study is about a large company that wanted to acquire us. And then, we walked away from that deal. And so it's always been about keeping the freedom. Now, as we've gotten bigger and now we're in the U.S. market, my viewpoint is I'm a bit more curious about maybe we do need more working capital, through debt, or do we take equity? But I'm really glad that I've kept it whole to this point. I think it was worth it. It was tough. I lost some sleep. There were times where I thought the company was going to die, because one guy doesn't pay you. It's a major cash flow constraint. But luckily, we were able to, our partners have been very supportive. Our customers have been very supportive with payment terms and things like that. So we were able to hustle and sweat it out and keep it whole to date.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, especially in the tech world, there's this perception that the only way to start a company is to raise equity or to raise funding. And one thing I love about your story, albeit in a different industry, is that you've kind of built Coita. You're so cocky you gave the company your name, but besides that, that you built it from the ground up. You built it from the ground up without raising any equity, and just kind of hearing you talk now, it sounds like you're starting to kind of reconsider that. And one thing I look back on in my own entrepreneurial journey is really understanding the right time to raise funding is critical. We've made a lot of mistakes in that over the course of the company, and we've learned from that. But I think there's this perception that to just get started, you need some money. And
I think that's so correct. That's the perception. I would say, whether it's tech, whether it's food security, or whatever, there's a couple things that we've done that allowed us to stretch it out. And there's really two things that stand out, that I would highlight to any upcoming entrepreneur to consider. Is number one, I don't believe in the concept of go big or go home. You don't have to start on day one and be like, I want to be in 10 countries and I want to have 28 products and I have to have the perfect product from day one, right? I think one thing that you can do to lower your cash requirement is you can first say, on the customer side, let's start with just one customer, right? Or two. Let's focus on one city, not the whole country or 2, 3 countries. And we don't have to have a whole full suite or a whole range of products. You know, we went against the grain and launched with just 2 products. You know, most people say you have to have at least 3 to 5 and a full range. I was like, why? You know, so we just started with 2 products. We did a lot of proprietary primary research and asked a lot of questions before we launched the products to make sure they were spot on. But on the customer side, we did that. On the supply side, or whether you have a software development company or a milk co-packer or something like that, we also said, look, hey, can we reduce our MOQs, or can we reduce the amount of code that we have to do to just a proof of concept and not the full suite of everything? Instead of 10 different modules, let's just do one, right? Do one or 2 products in our case. So then on the supply side, we reduced the amount of cash required, and then we would launch, you know, new products into, so we're small supply chain and very small focused customer base, requires very little cash. And what happens actually is when you get that going, right, you learn a lot and you can make less expensive mistakes, so that then when you go to 5 customers, you learn from the first 1 or 2 how to make it work. And when you expand your module to 5 or 6 different software modules or 5 or 6 different products, you've learned from the first instance, you know, how to, and so I guess what it comes down to is starting small is actually a wonderful thing, and experimentation is so good. You know, put your foot out in the water and experiment. You don't have to jump into the whole lake, you know.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happens is then when you want to raise debt or recruit someone or raise equity, instead of starting with, we've got nothing, let me raise, you've already got a proof of concept that's working. And essentially Coita in its first couple of years was a proof of concept. You know, we launched 2 products just in Dubai. We had 2 retailers. We had our MOQs were very small, so the supplier didn't have to extend us a lot of credit because we were buying very small quantities from them, you know.
Yeah.
And that's how we got started. And then we just started slowly. And next thing you know, we've got 2 products. We go to almost 30, and we're in just 2 retailers now. We're in 10 countries. So we slowly built up, you know, that and every time we had the track record, the supplier was ready to extend us a little bit more credit. The customers saw it working. They were like, hey man, can you give us better payment terms? They'd say, yeah, sure, but because they saw a track record. So you build off of a very small, it's like a snowball rolling down the hill, you know, and that's what I felt Coita was.
Yeah. I love what, you know, you kind of said, which is, to a certain extent, when you have a lot of money, you make expensive mistakes, versus having less money, you get more scrappy and learn how to make cheap mistakes.
Yeah.
So I guess one thing I'd love to learn more about is, you know, looking back on it, how did you manage having a family, kids growing up, and being an entrepreneur? It's not something I've done, and it's something that scares the shit out of me.
Listen, man, it's a scary, scary thing. I wasn't able to manage it in the way that I'd hoped. Okay, so listen,
Okay.
I mean, to be very, you know, open and transparent about it, it definitely affected my marriage. You know, it definitely affected my time with the kids. And I, you know, unfortunately, when you're starting a company, you're bootstrapping it, you don't have funding, you're in a somewhat, you know, this is an emerging market startup, environment is tough, probably one of the toughest in the world. So, you know, people say, hey, you got to balance this and that. I mean, again, like I said, there are exceptions to everything, but it's hard. Something's going to give, right? You've got your personal life, you've got your business, you've got your physical health. You know, you cannot, entrepreneurship is, I mean, I'll just tell you, it is not for the faint-hearted. You know, people watch a couple episodes of Shark Tank, they get some PR, they, you know, in the beginning, and they think it's all fun and games. They watch the entrepreneur's Instagram and think they're all, you know, it's a shit show. I mean, it is tough. There are days when you're you're redlining and working 22 hours a day. You've got to keep your game face on when you're out of cash. You're crying. You know, it's the toughest thing I've ever been through. So I'll tell you, I've come out of it on top and I've won, but my family did take a toll. So in two ways, you know, I'm not married anymore, but luckily I have a wonderful relationship with the mother of my children, and that's a great thing. And two, you know, I was not as actively participative in my kids' life for those couple early years. Now they're the only ones that I want to hang out with. You know, now that I've been able to, and I can't say that entrepreneurship was starting the company is the reason that I'm not married and the reason that I did, but I think it just triggered a lot of thoughts in my head, and I learned a lot of things about myself that made me, you know, do certain things. So, I mean, to answer the question, you're not going to be able to bounce it. You know, if you're really like, you know, if your dad gives you $10 million and he, you know, there's no pressure to like, you know, the KPIs, you're probably going to have an easy life. You know, it's not going to be as take a toll. But the environment that I was in, you know, I'd wanted it to be a different way, but it didn't. You know, and it created some havoc. But look, after the dust settled, I'm in a much better place right now. You know, and I'm really happy with where things have landed, and I think they had to. You know, and so my business life affected my personal life. Yeah. But I think where I ended up on both sides was the place I eventually needed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes me feel really good, man. Telling me that I'm screwed either way. Thanks for that.
I'm just here to motivate you. In a little bit of tough love, buddy. A little bit of tough love, buddy.
Yeah, hopefully my wife doesn't listen to this podcast.
No, listen, I do have to say that, you know, my ex is now probably one of my best friends. You know, and I think that when you go through entrepreneurship, there's a lot of realization, and she's amazing. I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for her. And I feel like I owe her, you know, for going through that difficult time with me. And we're just, I think both of us are in such a good place. And that's part, you know, entrepreneurship brings to the surface a lot of things in your business and personal life that you have to deal with, you know. And it's, like I said, it wasn't easy for me to talk about back in the days, but you know, I'm in a good place now where I can.
You get a call from Harvard?
Yeah. So I didn't get a call actually. I was, you know, I'm part of, as you know, EO, and we took and Professor Linda Applegate came to Dubai and did an executive, like, you know, couple weekends MBA course. And I was like the kid after class, I was asking Linda all these questions. And so the story based on how it all unfolded is basically Linda Applegate Professor Linda Applegate is the number 2 in charge of the program. She started the entrepreneurship program at Harvard, used to work in the White House. She's incredible energy. And she's like, who are you? You know, who's this guy? And I'm like, look, I started this milk company in the desert. And she's like, hey, hold on a second, you know, tell me a little bit more about this. And I said, yeah, here's the brand, here's what I did. I talked about, you know, the first 6 years or so at the time of my company. Yeah, naturally, subtly pitching, I guess. Yeah. And I was like, listen, I have on the dairy side, I compete with the $16 billion company, and on the non-dairy side, I compete with a $40 billion company. And, you know, we've done pretty well for ourselves. We give them a run for their money. And she's like, listen, that's amazing. She met my entire team. And she's like, can we write a case study about you? And I was like, of course you can. This would be amazing, you know. So they sent a case study writer from Boston to fly over to the U.S., to the UAE. They interviewed our entire management team. They interviewed all of our customers, you know, the owners of the retailers in Saudi Arabia, you know, the management teams of the biggest retailers in the UAE, our retailers in Singapore, Vietnam, everyone, and then our social media influencers. Because one of our things that we did is we got into the social media space before a lot of the FMCG companies did. And then they went back and they wrote the Coita Milk case study, which they teach in Boston every year now. And I'll tell you, one of the proudest moments was just before COVID. They invited me as sort of like the guest speaker, and I invited my kids and my ex to that event to be there with me. And it was the first time ever that my daughter Serena thought her dad was cool, you know. So here's my 15-year-old finally. She's like, you know, this guy is okay. And it was really cool. Like, you know, they all read about my life in the case study, and then they opened up a discussion, what should Mustafa do at this one inflection point? And it was so cool to hear like 150 other students talking about, you know, what should happen. And they teach it every year now. So I have to thank Linda for taking interest and sort of sponsoring the project. But that was one of the proudest moments in my career.
Did you end up forwarding the case study to all your dad's friends and, you know, all those bankers and consultants and doctors from your
all the haters and the doubters? No, not exactly. I'll tell you what did do it. This is probably my second biggest bragging point, is this July when we launched in the United States. You know, my father doesn't really understand what I do here, right? Because we weren't really in the U.S.
He thinks you're a milkman.
Yeah, he doesn't see it, you know. And he's like, Mustafa, you know, unless I see, you know, what is this, Coita? Where are you, you know? So we launched in the U.S., right? And we're not in Chicago yet, right? But my father, every day, his whole life, his old school Indian father, wakes up, opens up the Wall Street Journal, and reads the articles and all this kind of stuff. And so we actually, you know, had a great, you know, partner in the U.S. got interviewed by the Wall Street Journal because they took our products and they taste tested our products with the billion-dollar companies like, you know, Oatly and all this stuff, and they did a review and they loved the way our milks tasted because we have this premium Italian, you know, taste. And so we were in the Wall Street Journal in July of this year, and my dad gets to open up the paper, and he's like, there's Coita, his family name, in the Wall Street. And for an entrepreneur, you know, man, if you're in the WSJ is like the ultimate, you know, like thing. And so I'm in the Wall Street Journal, full color, like almond milk is like right there. And that was the thing I forwarded the most to all the, you know, the girls in high school that rejected me, and, you know, I was like, hey, look at this, you know, page number 18 in the section. But that was super cool. That was super cool. That was some shit that I definitely posted on my Instagram, you know, so it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. I mean, it's crazy how no matter how old we get, having that moment where your parent is proud of you still feels like one of the best moments in the world. I can imagine how you felt for sure.
No, it was good, you know, because my mom passed away, and my dad was a single father, you know, and then he remarried it, and, you know, had some help with my stepmom, but you know, my dad grew up in like a 200 square foot, you know, space in India, and he funded his way through school in the U.S., and he had a tough life, and I feel like I owe my father a son he could be proud of, you know, and I felt like when I was in the especially after I almost didn't make it into college, and it was just, you know, for me that was a really proud moment. Like I felt so That's good. Amazing. I felt so good that I could make him smile and, you know, brag to his other, you know, Indian dad friends and stuff like that.
His other Wall Street Journal readers.
Yeah, exactly.
That's beautiful, man. You know, that's a huge, you know, there's like this recurring theme, right? Talking to you. It's these little moments where you've kind of just kind of perfected or continue to practice and perfect your art of selling. And then these little moments happen, these being in the right place at the right time. And here you are pitching to a Harvard professor, and next thing you know, you're a case study. So it's beautiful. I love it.
Thanks.
One thing that I read was how you guys grew Coita in the UAE at a grassroots level, and obviously not having a ton of cash. probably had some role to play in
Oh yeah.
not having big budgets to spend on marketing. So I'd love to hear how you grew the brand, and any advice you have for entrepreneurs in terms of doing so.
Yeah, listen, when we launched, we were broke ass marketing budget. We had nothing, right? So,
negative.
Yeah, negative. I was like, well, you need to pay us to market with you, kind of thing. And we were so goddamn broke. And we would launch these 2 products, and we would go into retailers and we'd be like, hey, could you list our products? And they're like, oh, great, fine. But they got to take something else off the shelf that's making money and put your stuff in. And they're like, where's your $1 million marketing budget? And we're like, we're on Facebook. And, back then they didn't know what the hell Facebook was. They didn't know what that shit was. And so I was like, I'll tell you what I've learned. You don't need any money to get the word out. You need hustle. And so I'll give you an example of something that we did. I had some really good social media, so I befriended the social media bloggers because they didn't have a lot. And back then they didn't even have rate cards. They were doing it. That business was just starting, right? So I remember.
This is like 2014, 2013.
Yeah, 2013, 2014, 2015. And I remember.
But how did you kind of see that opportunity? How did you see this?
Well,
how did you even get into the blogger community?
Well, I think because I was young, tech savvy, I had a Facebook account at the time, and then eventually I got into Instagram a little later. But I knew that social media is where people were looking. They were looking less at the billboard that cost $250,000, and they were looking more at their Instagram, which was free. And so I saw that. I was part of that shift, I think, because I'm very young at heart and I really enjoy all that stuff. So I remember one of the social media mom bloggers, Edwina, she's such a cool lady. And she's like, she actually her and I were sitting and talking, and she'd done some stuff for us. And we were trying to brainstorm what to do, and she's like, listen, why don't you just do these coffee mornings with moms? And I'm like, that sounds super cheesy. Come on, Eddie, what's going on with this? And then we talked through it, and we're like, this is kind of interesting. Let's, get 10 moms that are like, kind of cool moms and have a decent social circle, and go to each of their houses or a coffee shop. We'll sponsor the coffee. We'll bring some sample bags, and we'll just have them each invite 8 to 10 moms, and I'll just come and I'll tell my entrepreneurship story. I'll tell them, I'll do a Milk 101 class and why organic milk is better than conventional. And I'll ask them questions of what do they want to see in the future, all within like 45 minutes, just straight from the heart, very honest and open. And we're like, yeah, let's do it, So we took the chance, and Eddie helped arrange, and I met like our PR agency, Letitia Tronig, and all these amazing people. And what happened was, this was like grassroots guerrilla marketing converging with social media, with word of mouth, all in the same shot. And I'll tell you what happened. It was the most beautiful thing that cost no money, really.
Yeah.
We would go, that mom would invite 8 other moms. They'd hear my story. They'd fall in love with the whole story. And then they would pull out their phones and start taking videos and Instagrams, and each of them had about 1,000 followers, right? Or some of them had 20 or 30,000 followers. They'd take selfies with me and with the milk and tag us, and realized there was 10 moms at each of them times 10 coffee mornings over 2 months. So we had almost 100 to 150,000 targeted impressions, word of mouth, And that just got the word out like this. And all of a sudden we were on fire, and the shit was just selling. We were stalking out left and right because those 150,000 moms were just going. They're like, oh, I met Mustafa and this and that. And my friend met him. And, word of mouth is the best. And so that conversions point, really that took us to the next level. And then I started befriending more social media folks because I couldn't afford it. And, I met like whether it's Chris Fade or all these guys started coming, and they started approaching us because we're a really authentic brand, and we were good for them, and so we built up a lot of partnerships. Basma Al Akarji in Saudi Arabia, now and now we're talking to like NFL players in the United States. We've got
That's
like
amazing.
And it's all been, I'll tell you, with the social media scene, we don't really pay. We just build a relationship, you know, and we're good, you know, and we work with our bloggers and we let them do what they want. We don't ask them to sign any crazy contracts or, hey, you got to do it. Keep it real. You know, if you like the product, then only post it the way that you like to, you know, and that's been a theme that we've had with our marketing policy, going forward.
That's a crazy story, man. And I love this idea of really having customers do the selling for you. I think it's especially in the tech world, there's a lot of lip service paid to customer centricity and, you know, be as close to the customer as possible. And I don't think a lot of us do that extremely well as entrepreneurs. So I love the story. I mean, and the fact that you were able to build a company on the back of that is kind of telling. And it's a great takeaway for entrepreneurs. So you're running a company that has 30 brands, 10 countries, growing
30 products. No, only
30,
one brand.
Sorry, 30 products, my bad. 10 countries. And what is being the CEO today of that company look like versus the company that you started in 2013?
Yeah, it's the job title or the JD has changed so much, you know, so I think one thing that I've learned is that as we grow from startup to SME to now, you know, getting to something that's bigger than an SME, the skills that I need, the thought process, like you don't have the luxury of strategy when you're starting out. You're putting out fires, right? And then once you put out enough fires, you get some breathing room. You can start looking out, you know, a quarter, then 2 quarters, and then a year, and then more than a year. And so I've learned that taking some time aside to develop strategy can really save you a lot of money and time, right? If you put some, and again, it's unfair to ask someone to put a lot of effort into the strategy stuff early on because you're just getting started, you know. So now I've been learning that strategy is really important. The other thing is it's people. I'm now managing people versus I was managing the business. Now I'm managing the people that are managing the business, and I'm recruiting the business. And I'll tell you, the core fundamental is I believe that I work for my people, right? I'm very empathetic. We've had very low attrition because there's no such, if there's anyone that's not performing well at the company, I look at it as it's my fault. You know, the buck stops with me, right? Why didn't I train them well enough? Oh, their incentive program probably didn't motivate them enough. I didn't take into account that, you know, they were pregnant during this period and that, you know, we should have probably given them better benefits. You know, we should have. And so I've been learning along the way about how to manage and incentivize and how to love your people more. And I'll tell you, I think I had an innate skill set for that because I had such shitty bosses in my past, right? I had in my early career, I just had crap bosses, you know. I had some really good bosses too, as well, that really motivated me and pushed me. But I had some shitty ones, you know, like my first or second job out of college when I was at these, big companies. So I learned from experience, and I'm like, I want to treat people the way I want to be treated. The other thing is, you know, I try and keep a very flat organization, you know, so I don't like a lot of layers. We try and keep the political, you know, we're not very politically correct. We're dropping the F-bomb. So I've kept the formality level very low on purpose, you know, in the company. Yeah. So, and it's kind of like we're like a tech company. We're really like a tech culture that's in the FMCG space, and that's how we operate culturally, you know. And I've recruited people that I'd like to hang out with, not necessarily that have the experience, but, you know, people that fit the culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, the kind of looking at people, managing people through the lens of the golden rule, right? Do unto others, you know, whatever the rule is, what you would,
Yeah.
what you do to, what you want others to do to you. And I think that's super powerful. And I completely agree. You know, I think one of the biggest challenges as you scale the company, the biggest challenge as you scale the company is human capital management. I mean, that's the single biggest challenge. And so entrepreneurs are going to make a ton of mistakes along the way. But I agree. I think if there's one piece of advice I'd give entrepreneurs is treat people like people. At the end of the day, I think that's what matters. People want to be heard. People want to be seen, and you know, treat them the way you'd want to be treated.
Yeah, and I think Tarek, to that great point that you made, is you should also realize that we're all just people, right? And so, and this actually has to do with yourself as an entrepreneur. It's like, you know, everyone's like, you got to have you're the leader of the company. You have to have your game face on. You always have to be smiling. You always have to, like, you know, don't show fear or, you know, this and that. And what I've actually realized is that's such a crock of shit, right? Because the most stressed out person in the organization is the entrepreneur at the top of the top of the pyramid. And you know, keeping it real, right? And it goes against the fact of keeping your game face on when you're struggling inside all the time. And so what I've realized is that I've learned to be vulnerable with my management team, not the whole company, but like if we have a shit cash flow situation, or if I'm not feeling great about something, or I'm feeling concerned about a partnership, or I'm feeling insecure, I've started telling my management that, hey, you know, I'm a little scared of this situation. I don't know if, and then they open up to me. Because when you're vulnerable with someone, they get vulnerable, and it's created such a bond, I think, in our management team, that we're all just, there's no bullshit. We're like, hey, you know, and it just brings the formality level down. And it's like we're friends, you know, talking to each other. And really good friends are vulnerable with each other. And we are so much more productive when we're like, hey, we've just opened this market. I'm scared. You know, I think we're a little bit in over our head. Maybe we should dial it back a little bit. And instead of trying to do it next quarter, let's push it out 2 quarters. Or I'm not ready for the strategy session. Let's get our shit together and postpone it another month because I'm not ready. You know, and so we've been. That's one of the philosophies of, that's our MO that I'm trying to permeate through the organization, and I think it's been very successful.
It's kind of this whole Brené Brown philosophy, right? Which is vulnerability builds trust, and trust is a critical environment to have in place for people to be willing to take risks, right? I think you said something earlier in the conversation, which is experimentation and trying things during the journey is one of the most important things entrepreneurs do. And then I think at scale, when you get to that size of an organization, driving that down across the team and encouraging them to take big bets or to experiment or to try to do things differently is what takes the company forward, right? You can no longer be the only person kind of singing that from the hilltops. So I agree with you. I think vulnerability builds trust, and then trust creates an environment where the team feels comfortable taking risks, and that's what you need to continue to grow the company. So I'm all in on what you said. I'm 100% in alignment there. I heard you throughout the conversation today be authentic, talking about, authenticity is kind of the key. I heard you challenge the status quo over and over and over again. And I heard you hone your skills and be intentional about practicing to get better. And within that, self-confidence is a skill. And I learned a lot from our conversation today. It's been fun. It's been enlightening.
Thanks.
Where can people find you? So obviously, Coita Milk, all the big retailers. But where can they find you in the social space?
Yeah, so we're
I think you're on Instagram.
Yeah, so our website is obviously koita.com. And then on Instagram, it's Koita Foods, Koita Foods. And, you know, like I said, we're in about 10 countries. We're very strong online. So please follow us on Instagram if you want to keep in touch with us.
Amazing. Koita, it's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot for your time. And I can't wait to have another conversation with you.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks a lot, Tarek. Really appreciate it.